9:30, and I'll call the meeting to order. And we'll have a roll call. Tina, do you want to call us out?
Sure. Make sure the mics are on.
Are we on? Am I on? Check, check.
Jim, you might need to turn yours on.
There it
There
is.
you go.
Now?
Yo, yeah. We've got you.
Okay,
Oh, no, I'm not.
is yours on?
Yeah.
Okay. James Marston, Chairman.
Here.
Robert Burnham.
Here.
Martha,
Not here.
not here, okay. Karen Johnson.
Not present.
Nick Kuntz.
Here.
Ken McLellan.
McClellan, yes,
Okay. Barbara Silver.
here.
And we have
That's good. Yeah.
Tina Diaz and Mike Wilshire present.
Okay, and we have one guest in the audience, Petra. We'll call for public comments in a minute, I think, but we low vision folks want to know where people are out there. And here comes. No.
Yeah, public speaker, maybe?
Okay.
I'm not sure what to do next. Maybe turn it off and start again.
We just have a new visitor in the back. Would you like to let us know who you are, if you would like?
Oh, hi, I'm Nancy Capone. I'm just a member of the public.
Okay.
Okay. Are you here for a public comment?
No, sir, I don't have any comments today. I'm just here out of
Okay.
curiosity. to
Thank
observe.
you.
Thank you.
Well, the next thing we have here is public comments. And so, Petra, could you hand me your slip, please?
Oh.
Yeah, we have it over
Okay,
here.
okay, sorry.
Want to come up and get a mic?
Yeah,
Oh,
she's
this
up.
one?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, I'm Petra Lowen. I work at the Independent Living Resource Center. I'm the community living advocate, which means I help people find and maintain housing. It's come to our attention that recently there have been quite a few conversions of condos into short-term rentals. Obviously, it takes away available housing, but that's not why I'm here. Once they're considered short-term rentals, they should be considered businesses. And as such, they should be subject to ADA accessibility and accessible parking regulations. And I'm wondering if this committee has looked into it or would like to look into it. That's my public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That has been a big problem, and I think the city does not know yet what to do with that. You're right, the ADA is not being followed on those.
You're up, Will. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a little out of breath. I just jogged here from San Francisco, and the 335 miles is getting a little long. I apologize for that. Do I have a few minutes? I'd like to propose that the board take up a future agenda item.
Yeah, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Okay, thank you. I'll take 20 seconds of that to give a standard disclaimer that I always give in case it would prompt you to disregard anything I say. I hope not, but I do actually technically not live here in the city. I'm here on behalf of an organization, Accessible Santa Barbara, but I always try to make it clear that we are a small organization and that we are not a litigation group, that we engage in lobbying and persuasion and administrative procedures here in Santa Barbara to improve accessibility here in Santa Barbara. So now to the point. This committee members have in the past expressed a concern that new ordinances for the city sometimes come down the pike and stakeholders are engaged to participate in that process, and yet sometimes there is an ordinance that has either unforeseen or ignored accessibility ramifications, and yet the accessibility community is not consulted as a stakeholder. So an opportunity has arisen where there is a new ordinance coming down the pike, finally with sufficient lead time, that if you choose to, you could actually choose to have a discussion of this proposed ordinance and its accessibility ramifications at your next meeting. It is an ordinance being referred to as the valet parking ordinance, and what it will do is legalize on-street valet parking operations in the city. I can tell you that my concern in bringing this to your attention is that my current read of the draft is that it does not impose any requirement that the city, in allowing these on-street valet parking operations, it does not impose any requirement that the city make the valet parking operations compliant with the applicable codes. There are accessibility standards for valet parking drop-off and loading and unloading. And whatever you conclude in the end, since this is the current status of the ordinance is that ordinance committee reviewed it once, had some concerns, and postponed it. So it will come back at some point to ordinance committee and then go on to city council. It is not a time-sensitive emergency to allow this, and I believe there's sufficient time if you were to have a discussion item in December about the ADA Title II ramifications of this ordinance. ADA Title II, and most of you know, is the federal law that protects program access. The federal courts have recently taken a more expansive view of what is program access and what is a program. It is essentially anything a city does. So here, in my view, this would be a new city program to allow private use of parking spaces in the public right-of-way. And in my view, it does not currently provide for accessibility to be a requirement of approval of each one of these. So however you come out in the end, I hope you will consider, one of you perhaps making a motion to have this agendized for discussion at your next meeting. If staff is available, that's great. I think that it would be fine to have a discussion amongst yourselves based on the text of the ordinance if staff were not available. I don't think this is an item that can wait for staff availability because the ordinance will be coming at some point. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your consideration of my request. Any
Thank
questions?
Really. Thank you.
I would be willing to entertain a motion if someone's interested. I think this sounds like a pretty good place for us to get some input.
Yeah, I want to thank Will for bringing this to our attention because it's a great concern to me. I think that there's a big problem with valet parking and accessibility in this town. And I would make a motion to put this on the agenda.
Second?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Will, what is the timeline for the ordinance to come before City Council?
It's currently unclear. It went to ordinance committee. Ordinance committee was not happy with it. So it's being reworked. I'm not sure by whom. When there will be at some point a new draft. When it goes to ordinance committee next is a discretionary decision by the city. I am not aware of any emergency need to do this. So you may hear otherwise from people who want to get this legalized. There's two large companies in the city that have the vast majority of valet parking contracts, and they have some influence and they're pushing hard for this. But there's not a set time frame. It will need to go back to the ordinance committee at some point. That's sort of a black box process, I think, coming out of the city attorney's office. And then once ordinance committee passes it, it can then be considered by the full council. I would hope that if you had agendized discussion in December, that there would be some consideration in allowing you to actually have that discussion prior to passing the ordinance.
Can I ask staff real quick, do we have to have an agendized discussion before we can alert the ordinance committee that there is a concern from our committee?
No, not necessarily. You can direct a concern to me, and I'd be happy to pass that through to the transportation manager who's running this ordinance.
Do we need a motion to do that, or?
No, not necessarily. You guys can individually contact me, and I can relay the information.
Great, thank you.
So, Michael, you said we don't really have to have a motion and a vote here, just we would like to do this, but I don't know.
I'm happy to agendize it. If
Okay.
you guys would like this to be something on the November agenda, I'd be happy to have our
Well,
transportation manager
I
come and
think
speak
more
if
importantly,
he's
we'd like to
available.
get the ordinance when it is finalized and look at it. It's not as much as a discussion at the next meeting as much as us to have input.
It'll be a public document, so there's
Okay.
no reason why you can't access it.
But prior to, in case things move quickly, I'd like that the ordinance committee to be aware that there's a concern here so that they may have opportunity to consult with us prior to pushing anything through. And then in the meantime, we have a motion, and I believe it was carried, that this become an agenda item.
Seconded.
Seconded,
We
okay.
haven't voted yet.
Okay, so maybe we could get back to that vote before we forget.
I have one more,
Mr. Chairman.
one more question, and that is this kind of valet parking going on right now, pending the ordinance?
With, in a few instances, with legal authority that is unclear, I will cautiously mention one specific property. In all fairness to them, they're not here, but the Lark Restaurant in the Funk Zone operates. And I believe that if you want to observe how this would work at innumerable places in the city, you can observe their operation. The characteristics that I see are reservation of on-street spaces, exclusion of other uses, a kiosk in the sidewalk, which might impede the right-of-way for people of low vision or using mobility aids.
Actually, yes, it is in progress right now.
Well,
We can go-
their operation, it's unclear what, to me, the legality of it. I would question whether it's legal to claim street spaces currently for private use. I think that if I put cones out in front of a house to save my space for when I get back, I have a feeling I would run afoul of some ordinance if I did that. The other issue that I would point out at that particular location is that the valet parking on the street often results in the on-site valet parking, the on-site accessible spaces.
Thank you, Will. The
being-
question was strictly, is there something going on right now? And the answer is yes, you can go to the Lark and see it, right? So,
Correct, I just
Right.
didn't mean to, I just wanted to make it clear that it's unclear if that's actually legal.
well, that wasn't the question. Is,
Okay.
Are people doing this now? And the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
I want to make sure that we actually ask the ordinance committee to notify us when the new draft is ready, so that we can look at it. Can we do that?
Yeah, that's loud and clear. You've asked me, so I'll report
Okay.
back with information on
Thank
that,
you.
on timing.
Addressed to Mike and Tina, if we follow our calendar, our next scheduled meeting is November 17th.
Yes,
And I don't know if we need to act before that.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Okay, should we have a vote on the motion that we put this on our November agenda? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Pass unanimously. Please let the record show.
Thank you again, Will.
Thank you, Will.
Okay, the next item is approval of minutes and discussion of pending items. So on the minutes, does anyone have any comments?
The minutes for February?
Yeah, we need to approve the minutes for February 17th
Right.
regular meeting and April 14th special meeting and our June 9th regular meeting.
Well, with regard to February, I had asked them to be revised because I found them very confusing to work from. They were not revised, but the audio file is online, and Mike assured me it will stay online, and that answered my concerns. One, why I was feeling confused, and the other, that the motion that I made that Will seconded was not accurately reflected in the minutes, and or the context in which it was made in response to Justin's request. Now, I can't approve the minutes as they are now, but I could refer anybody to the audio file for what I actually moved, which included a letter from, for our committee to sign off on. So as far as I know, the minutes are still in draft form, and a letter, our committee hasn't signed off on the letter, but that's February, and then another meeting was called to address those deficiencies, I think, and in my motion, it was in response to Justin's request because of deficiencies with our prior minutes. And so there was a side discussion about deficiencies with minutes. And I guess that's all I have to say about February.
Can we get a little clarification there? Are we approving or not approving these minutes?
I will not approve them as they're written. I won't ask you to rewrite them since you've said that the audio file will stay up. And anybody who wants to hear my actual motion in response to Justin's request can hear it there. Otherwise, I would like the minutes to be rewritten to reflect what's actually there. There seems to be a misunderstanding as to what needs to go into minutes, which are the functional working points of this committee, not a summary of other people's comments, not a history of the past, not a laundry list like you'd read in the newspaper, but actual decisions we've made, things we voted on, exactly how we voted. So that's part of my general dissatisfaction with the minutes.
And that's the intent of the minutes. If there was something that was incorrect, that can always be rectified.
Yes.
But I wasn't clear that there was something that was specifically incorrect other than the format.
My motion and Nick's second, that is incorrect in the minutes.
Comment. I want to just let you know that the audio files are not accessible to me. I can't use them as their dark and deaf people use them if they're not written out. They're not an accessible format. And I have no idea what the discussion is about and what audio really means.
Oh, well, then I guess those minutes should be revised to reflect what's actually on the audio file.
That is the goal
That was-
of meeting minutes. So if there's a specific inconsistency, you can let us know and we'll rectify it.
Okay. Maybe the best way is to email you
Yeah,
that and not
absolutely.
discuss it here.
That would be quick and easy.
Okay. So I would like to defer approval of the minutes,
Of the February minutes.
of the February minutes.
How about the April 14th special meeting and the June 9th minutes?
Do you want to call that?
On the special meeting, I have concerns. I had asked, as you know, twice, I asked for assurances from Justin about certain things that were going to be done on the property. I requested those things be put in the special meeting minutes. They have not been put there. Justin then later on wrote an email saying that these things were changed. And the 10 o'clock closing time is now 8 o'clock. And I'd asked him twice to make sure that the side door to the restaurant would be open. This is where the garbage comes in and out. And he said, right here, he said yes. And then he writes an email that those things will be locked because of security. My assurances from Justin were never put in the minutes, even though I asked that. And now it's like a fait accompli. He said, oh, they're not going to be open, and now all of a sudden that's the new rule. The minutes should reflect what was said at the meeting. So I would ask again that the tape be listened to, and his assurances of different things such as opening and that path being open be on the minutes. I bring this up because I've gotten a lot of flack from the disabled community lately because there are letters floating around this city claiming that we made certain decisions based on certain things that we did here. And the most egregious to me is, in one sentence, Justin said to us, there's a conflict between the path of travel from the restaurant to the garbage, which is required by ADA, and the conflict is with the path of travel to the proposed route and ramp on the east side. That was a one-sentence statement from him. If you read these letters that are now part of the public record, it says that we decided that one route was more important than the other. So I would like these tapes to be listened to and the minutes to reflect what actually was said and what assurances were made. I can't tell you how many people have called and said, what the hell are you guys doing? You're ADA and you're telling us that you voted to accept the fact that wheelchair garbage delivery is more important than access to the front door. We did not vote on that particular statement. So I would like, Tina, if you could, I've read these minutes over and over again. I'm sorry, I've listened to the tape. And there's definitely statements there that are not shown in the minutes and are now being misrepresented. So I would say on the first two sets of minutes, I would like the tape to be listened to. Barbara can give some input, but I know she doesn't want to rewrite them, but I think the audio tape, and thank you so much for having it available, Mike, please listen to those. As far as the minutes for the last meeting, I have no problem with those. Tina has done a good job on that one. It's a learning curve, and I'm acceptable of that. Any comments from other people on the committee about the special meeting or about the...
I have a comment about these letters that are floating around. I would sure like to see them and see how my vote is being misrepresented.
Okay. Well, I asked them to be available, but Mike said he can't get them, even though they're there. But
That's not true. You asked me 2 days ago for those, and that's a public records request, and so we'll have those within a week was my response.
Yeah,
We have 10 days.
yeah.
So.
And so we
And
would like to-
we had provided, it's just a conglomeration of all the exact letters we've already seen.
Okay.
So he just wanted them all combined into one package. So all of those letters have been brought before the group,
And when before you send
or
those-
included with publicly
Is it
available
okay if I
plans.
highlight the offending parts? I don't want everybody to have to read a long letter if there's a few statements that they should look at. Is it okay if I highlight stuff before you send them out?
It's a public document, so I'll provide them to you, and you can do with them whatever you like.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
So we can't really do anything now on that, but it has been very upsetting for me to be attacked by different people. And I haven't even seen part of them, but I've been hearing what was said, so thank you for bringing that up. Oh, here's Karen.
Hello.
Okay, so we need to have some motions on this to make this official. Do I hear a motion on what to do with the February meeting minutes?
Morning, Karen.
Approval or not?
I move to defer them, to defer approval until they have been revised.
I second.
Okay, on the special meeting minutes, do I hear a motion
Are
about?
we finished voting on this?
We need to vote on
Oh,
February.
okay. I'm entertaining a vote here for the approval or disapproval. No,
Approval.
For my, I'm sorry.
Deferral.
For Barbara's motion that we defer them until they're revised on the first meeting in February. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let the minutes reflect that we are going to defer those until they're redone according to the audio tape. Second would be the special meeting. Do I hear a motion on the minutes?
I'll motion to defer.
Second.
Okay. All in favor to defer the minutes?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
That's for the April 14th special meeting.
Okay, no opposed. Let the minutes show that that's going to be deferred. And then the last meeting we had. Do I hear a motion to accept or deny those?
I'll motion that we accept the most recent,
For June 9th.
June 9th.
And do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so there's a motion to accept the meetings on the June 9th meeting. Can I hear, all in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay,
As a matter of procedure, I noticed that you said let the minutes reflect, and I want to make sure that that's, when we as a committee want to see things on a minute, and we say let the meeting, or the minutes reflect this decision, I would like to make sure that those items get on the minutes.
that's a good statement. Is that the
Excellent.
proper
Yep,
wording
yep.
for you? If we say that, they will be there?
It is our goal to make the minutes reflect the meeting as accurately as possible, and so, yes, if you say a confirmation statement such as that, it will only continue to help us
Okay,
make
thank
it
you very
more
much.
clear.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Nick. Okay. Now, the next part is any pending items that we want to discuss?
Well, I kind of like to think of parking as a pending item since we're never quite ever reaching any sort of closure on it. I emailed Mike, I like the disabled parking, a brief guide, very much as something that we can, it's something that we do have on our website and that we could perhaps have revised to be more inclusive and more helpful and useful to the disabled community generally. So I had a discussion with Carl at the waterfront because there they do have valet parking going on. And while my contact with them was quite a while ago, at that time I was told, no, I could not self-park in the disabled parking that was corralled inside the valet parking area. He said, no, that was not right, that I or anybody else could tell them that and could say he said so. So it seems to me that's the kind of thing that belongs on our brief parking guide along with the city information.
I agree, and I had a similar, almost identical experience at the waterfront there on the pier, where I was told I could not park. And in fact, valet parking there was monopolizing the 2 ADA parking spaces. And management was very obstinate in fact, we had to get the city police involved to mitigate our dispute. And I followed up with Carl on that, and he provided the valet parking company with written notice that that was not okay.
Oh,
That was back in February.
oh.
Yeah.
Well,
But I agree, I would like to see this updated, and I think that there's some current events that can contribute to that. And if there were to be a subcommittee appointed to work on that, I would volunteer to be on that subcommittee.
Well, and so would I, since it's a continuing interest of mine.
Let me ask first of all, is it possible that we can put things on our website that are of interest, such as Captain Stoney being very gracious to look up stuff? None of the public seems to know there's a resource to do. Where's the resource for removing tree limbs that are hanging over? Where's the resource for looking at the ADA code or the California Building Code? Would we be able to set up a committee to look at adding some information to the website?
To the city website.
Yeah,
The
to our
city-
AAC website.
The city website has all that information. I would try and avoid making our AAC website a clearinghouse to look up stuff that already exists on the existing website. But
Can we have
What
links?
about a list of quick links to existing pages that may not be found via, somebody comes to the AAC page looking for these resources and they don't find them, they might give up. The city website is quite difficult to navigate, in my opinion. And so just a list of links to existing documents, could we provide that?
In short, yeah, no problem. But
Okay.
I'd like to avoid this just becoming a giant laundry list of redirects to everything that anybody could ever
Well,
want
I don't think it's
information on.
I think if we call it a guide, it will sound more palatable to you, because that's what it is. It's like a directory or a guide, that
Yeah.
people looking for information are redirected to the source of the information. Not that we want to put it all on our website, but we do want to have directional information.
I think a one-page document that should be sufficient, and it wouldn't just be a list of links. It would be an informative guide like this that might include a handful of links.
Mhm.
I hope we can do that. It's just oftentimes with disabilities, it's much harder to navigate web pages.
It is.
And it's just, I know that, Mike says they're there, they probably are someplace, but where do I go? And how much time do I spend to decide where should I look for, like, the best guy to talk to at the police department? So it would be really helpful if we could have just a small presence on our website. So people,
So
whether they're
We
new.
already have this, which is great. It's already there.
This is there, but
I've
it's
never
not up
seen
to
that
date.
before. I didn't know that existed, and I've spent a lot of time on that website recently.
It's under staff reports.
Okay, so I think that we maybe could look at, as a committee, what can be done to our committee's webpage.
Yeah.
And the disability rights section, perhaps. That listing of different things,
So-
parking and other things.
Something user-friendly.
Nick, I think your mic's off.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob, I stepped away from them, or leaned back away from the mic. So I understand Mike's concern. We don't want to make this a maintenance issue. I can be, I'm very sensitive to that. That's what I do for a living, is maintain websites, and I know that this can become an administrative burden. But I'd like to motion that we appoint a subcommittee to look at revising this guide and the AAC committee webpage and make some recommendations for staff.
I'll second that and
We're tired of
suggest,
being ignored.
Retired being in order, think again. I will second that motion and say that since you do this for a living, I'm gonna say that you should be the head of this ad hoc committee, and we could start working on what we think would be good. Does that sound like something we can vote for?
I accept the nomination.
All right.
And who's on the ad hoc committee?
I volunteered to be on it too.
Okay.
Would you like to be on one?
No, thank
Okay.
you.
I would give input, but I think it might be good to get something from someone else. So I'm available, but I'm not saying put me on. Let's start with a 2, perhaps, and you can add something. We have to have it less than a quorum, so 3 is the max for now. Okay, all in favor of having an ad hoc committee looking at what to do with a informative web link? Say
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let the record show that we have formed an ad hoc committee to do this. And speaking of ad hoc committees, last meeting, Bob said he was going to reinvigorate the ad hoc committee they had for the rewriting the resolution.
I wasn't sure if that was under pending items or committee reports, which is the next item on the agenda, but either way, yeah.
To move that along, I want to ask that we also put that on the agenda for December, just a brief report from the ad hoc committee on
For goals and objectives and the resolution.
and the resolution.
Right.
So can the minutes show that we're going to have a quick report from that committee?
Okay. The other pending item, Jim, that I had was, I wanted to apologize to Mike and Tina that I had not, I promised I'd get back to you with a revised document that I have had for some time on city sidewalks. I'm still working on revising that, and I'd like to recommend that we've been putting it off for several meetings. My fault for not being on top of it more, but I'd like to put that on the agenda for the November meeting if possible. And I'll get that document to you within, I would say, by the end of September.
I think I saw you put it on the next agenda, is that correct?
Yeah, I had a tentative meeting or agenda item for sidewalks and safety improvements, and I was
Okay.
going to have Mr. Jim Dewey come back and speak about
Okay,
that.
good. So that's on there and
It'll
you're
be
going to
available.
to
Yeah,
Mike? Okay.
by the end of September, I'm giving myself if I don't give myself deadlines, then I procrastinate.
Okay, thank you. Any other pending items that we need to discuss? Okay, the next item is committee member reports and any staff announcements. So I'll let the staff have first shot. Are there any announcements to make?
No, nothing other than I know last time we talked about the library south entrance project, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in the future, but that's still underway and progressing nicely. So.
I have an announcement to make here. I got this from Jacob at ILRC. For those interested, the Santa Barbara County Election Division will have their biannual Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting on September 8th, and that's at 1 till 4:30. There's a demonstration of the new voting machines. They want input from the public. I have more information here. I don't want to take too much time, but I was asked to please let the committee know that on September 8th, there will be a meeting at the Louis Lowry
Davis
Center at 1232 De La Vina. And it starts at 1 o'clock, and then there's a demo, and then there's a meeting at 2:30. So I think the 1 o'clock to 2:30 pretty much would wrap it up. But there would be a demo of these machines. Bob had been there before.
Yes.
So I just want to get that memo out to you. If you want any more info, I have a little bit more information there. And another quick report is that the county had a complaint about accessibility issues, so they started up a appeals board for disability complaints, and I was privileged to be asked to join that. So we did have a meeting last month, but there's action in the county now as far as appeals board, just like we have here in the city. Appeals board, Nick is on that committee, and it meets next week, by the way. And
On that note, it might be of interest to this committee that next week's Building and Fire Safety Appeals Board meeting is going to be discussing an issue relating to accessibility. So I would encourage those interested to check the agenda.
When will that be?
It's next Friday.
Next,
Or no,
the
sorry,
Thursday,
Thursday,
Thursday.
Thursday the 7th.
2:30 in this room, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
If you haven't been before, they're kind of interesting. This is where people come when they don't want to follow what the building department has said they should do. Sometimes there's very valid reasons, sometimes it's just to save money, but there's often, it's a very interesting concept because you can't just apply one set of rules to everybody, especially in this hilly environment and all the different problems we have here. You know, as I always tell people, San Francisco is very good at their accessibility law, but the whole city itself is totally inaccessible to wheelchairs based on the terrain, so it's kind of interesting that way. And the same thing happens here. How can you do, well, anyway, you know what I'm saying. It's a good thing to get involved with the appeals.
The other
So
thing
wait,
about,
they should have learned some of the things that we're seeing in Texas from the flood and the wheelchair. People in a wheelchair can't get to the third floor, or how, if they're already there, how you bring them down without the elevator working, and, you know, some things that seem like simple access aren't. And so the meeting's on Thursday the 7th? Or
It's
the 8th?
It's the 6th, I believe.
That's Wednesday?
I'll have to double check the agenda, but
There's the Board of Appeals on Thursday.
Yeah.
5th is Tuesday.
okay, so it's Wednesday then. It's the 6th, I'm almost certain.
It's on the website, just like we have the AAC website, they have an identical type formatted website.
it's called Building and Fire Safety.
Police and fire, right?
Building and Fire Safety Appeals Board.
Right.
Okay.
Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals. Sorry.
And there on the site, you'll see they have a staff report where Mr. Stuffler, the building official, sends out his response to an appeal, and then the applicant also gives their side of the story and uses their plans and drawings and stuff to show why they're trying to change. So it's an interesting exchange of ideas. Okay, any other
Sorry,
staff
it is
report?
September 7th is the
Yeah.
next meeting on the website.
Jim, I have one more.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember the meeting date. City Council, I think it was August 2nd or 9th. Item 12 regarding regentrification of businesses on downtown State Street and the need to include accessibility. And Jim and I both gave public comment at the City Council meeting regarding the need for businesses to not only be aware of, but include accessibility features in renovation or reconstruction of their buildings, especially along the State Street corridor, but also in the general downtown area. And we did give public comment. I'm not sure, I believe the item was voted on in favor of by City Council, but I don't know for sure. But apparently, I was told that some businesses are, which is kind of MO, I guess, trying to find ways around accessibility, like Jim said, because of cost. In a lot of these are old buildings with narrower doorways and problems with internal spacing and so on. But I'm glad we were able to speak with City Council and just help them become more aware of the need to include accessibility in these renovations.
If I can
add anything to that?
I had meant to mention that because I had an interesting story. There's two sides of the story, but it seems like there's 30 empty spaces on State Street, retail spaces, and the building owners like to say in private that the problem is the city is too strict on accessibility And the process takes too long, and therefore they're losing money because they can't get a permit to open. People in the accessibility committee realize that the city is, if at all, not as strict as they should be. So it's a matter of, do you kowtow to the building owners or to the law that says things must be accessible? So the building owners have gotten together and want special treatment from the city as far as expediting this process, and that was approved. I used to be a landlord years ago before I couldn't drive anymore. I'm a capitalist pig. I understand capitalism, I should say. I'm just joking. I keep saying to myself, the problem is this: your rents are too high, and that's why people move out. And so what was interesting to me was recently in the New York Times, they had a story about Soho District, where they have a huge problem with vacancies. They admitted it's because the rents are too high. They never once blamed the city for strict enforcement of something. So it really bothered me, and that's why people from the Accessibility Committee went there, because they're saying, oh, it's those accessibility folks. They point to certain places that are closed down because they haven't met the permit requirements. I'm sorry. You can't build a building with an unsafe roof. You can't build a building with bad wiring, but somehow people want to build buildings that aren't accessible, and they think there's a choice between it. It's all in one code called the California Building Code. So anyway.
What was the outcome of that meeting?
They accepted the plan to expedite the process. Now what sounds good is they're gonna say to the people ahead of time, remember you must do occupancy, which requires whether you have sprinklers or not. You must do the bathrooms, you must do access. Because the real problem is the whole slowdown is not caused by the building department, it's caused by people not doing, when the plan checks say you must do X, Y, Z, they don't want to do certain things, so they don't do them. So it comes back again.
So-
they still don't want to do it. So the slowdown is not doing.
How are they planning to expedite it, and was there any discussion about ignoring accessibility issues?
They didn't mention that at all, but the rumor on the street is it's always the fault of the city being too strict, and there's pressure to get the business flowing and the money going, because that's the
Yeah.
lifeblood of.
But I don't see any local ordinance to override state building code.
No, the city has no intention of skirting building code or ADA code. Like that is not on
may
the
be-
chopping block
that
for.
may be the discussion of the downtown business owners, but that's
Right,
not
right.
on any agenda
Right.
or.
True.
I mean, it sounds great because, like I said, the problem is they don't do it when it's first told you must do it. Let's say an accessible lift. They keep putting that off, and then the time frame becomes too long. Then they blame accessibility for that. But the real blame is you should have done it right in the first place. Yes, there's no thing to actually remove it. What they're trying to do is expedite it. You're going to have a front desk, a hotline. If you're on that certain block, a certain area of State Street, you can call the hotline, get expedited to the front of the line.
This all sounds great to me. Having dealt with building and planning, I agree that these things should be expedited.
Right. But see, it's only State Street, so they.
Well, that's a start.
It's a start. Anyway, that's all on that, but,
I just wanted to mention.
thank you. Are there any other staff reports or comments or interesting news? Okay. Okay, we have a report from engineering about the project updates.
Hello, Laura. How are you?
Morning, everyone. I'm Laura Yanez with Engineering Streets Design, and I'm here to give you the update on our current and completed projects. So I'll go ahead and start with the ones recently completed. So just last week, the North Lecumbre Sidewalk project, Phase 1.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Where is it?
North Lecumbre
Okay.
Sidewalk, so from Via Lucero, 1 street behind Upper State, up to Stacy Lane was completed, and we are currently starting design on the second phase, which would take off from the one that was just completed through the portion of Lecumbre that's owned by the county.
Just on the east side of Lacombe?
This is on the east side of Lecumbre, yes.
Okay.
So there's new ramps, 4 new ramps on Via Lucero, and then all the missing sidewalk was filled in. Then,
How many blocks roughly was that, the missing sidewalk?
We're filled in.
How many blocks?
I believe it's like 3 blocks.
Okay.
There was just segments that were missing, so
Okay.
now they're all filled
Thank
in.
you.
And now the next phase will actually add an all new sidewalk, which was not there. There's no portions that have sidewalk there currently.
Thank you.
We also recently completed the Old Coast Highway sidewalk infill and crossing project from Harbor View west about 600 feet. So that adds a crossing over to the tennis courts as well as new sidewalk on Old Coast Highway.
Which side of Old Coast Highway?
The east side as well. Yes. And there's actually a project that will also, for next year in design, that will continue the sidewalk all the way to Salinas. Next, we have the completion of the De La Vina street improvements. So there was flashing beacons added at various intersections of De La Vina, as well as a new street light. We also recently completed the sunset ramps. So it was 10 access ramps on the west side that were missing on Sunset Street. So those were recently completed as part of the CDBG 16-17 program. Also, with our annual pavement and overlays, we are required to replace or upgrade any of the ramps that are adjacent to the roadway being repaved. So Zone 3 ramps were recently completed as well. And then upcoming construction, so things that are basically complete with design, is the Milpa sidewalk infill. So that'll be adding sidewalk in front of Trico all the way to Cabrillo, basically from the railroad to Cabrillo. Also the construction of the Cacique and Soledad improvements, so we'll be replacing the pedestrian bridge on Cacique Street as well as adding a new bridge over to Soledad Street. So currently, Soledad Street is not accessible from Cacique due to the creek, so we'll be adding a new pedestrian bridge as well as 500 lineal feet of sidewalk out to Carpinteria Street along Soledad. We're starting the design of our CDBG 17-18 ramps, which will be delivered in March, and also the design of the Carpinteria Voluntario intersection. So those are currently starting design.
So what do you do in your spare time? Sounds
We're
very
really
good
busy.
thing. I want 2 questions.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned putting in curb ramps when there's street improvements. Now, I know it's not for slurry seals and stuff. At what point is it just when they dig up the street?
When there's overlays,
Okay.
deep grade.
Meaning when they dig up the top layer
Yeah.
and resurface. I want to give some feedback on the De La Vina improvements.
Uh-huh.
Living in that neighborhood, using that street, that's a huge improvement, and I like it a lot. And so, good job there.
I'll let my team
I
know.
agree, it was just a death trap before.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention Kai Lorella's, the walking beacon crossing De La Vina. Kai Lorella's huge,
Yeah.
huge improvement. I go to Trader Joe's all the time, and I feel like I can get across there safely now. So
I only wish we could have the same beacon at Foothill and Cayularellas.
Oh, we have had that request quite a bit.
Yeah,
But it's the county.
I
Yeah.
understand.
Well, thank you for that. I'll let my team know.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for the data, but I'm just curious. We have regular painted crosswalks in the street, and then there must be some problems, so we move our steps up to the lighted crosswalks, or the flashing beams. Do we have any data on decrease in accidents, or is there any data-driven things on how safe those really are? We all love them, of course, but I'm just curious if you have any data on it.
I don't know the data. I know our traffic engineer, Derek Bailey, does, and that's why he, when he finds a scenario that is appropriate, he implements them, but I can find out from him what the net reduction is and get back to you.
Okay, and I'll give you a thank you from people who sometimes aren't thought about that need this. It's not just people in wheelchairs and low vision. It's all of us who are getting older. Eventually, your gait slows down, your mind's a little bit foggy. These things are so important, and as we age as a country, it's just really important to have that. And they're not the typical advocate for disability, they just need more time to cross streets or whatever. So thank you so much, it was a very good report.
Can I ask you a question then, because the installation by Monte Vista School, I would think goes from one side, which is the city, to the other side, which is the county, because I thought the line went down the middle of Hope Avenue.
I don't know the exact boundary there.
So maybe we have had something cooperatively with the county.
Yeah, there are some projects where we cooperate with them when there's an opportunity, when we can apply jointly for grants, we do.
Could the Foothill one be in that category?
That one is solely in the county, so
Oh, wait a minute,
sometimes when it's.
within the city limits, it's a county
Road.
highway.
Right,
County
yeah.
road.
But
State highway.
Coyotelas is the street that has the safety issue, and that's a city street.
Yeah, I can, I know we've noted it, and I can check on the status of that.
Thank you for following up on that.
Yeah.
One quick question, you mentioned the 2018 plans that are in the works. I'm curious which areas are slated for
I
improvement.
think the report is March, isn't it?
For the exact locations of the ramps,
Just the general vicinities that are going to be, part of the next year's projects.
yeah.
That's
So
our plan.
the Carpinteria of Ontario is on the east side, so that's a safety improvement for the crossing, and then the CDBG ramps. I know this one, there's a lot of ramps that are just solely, we like to usually do them in groups when they're all near each other, and I think this project is to pick up a bunch of lonely corners where there's only one ramp needing an improvement. So I'll get the exact locations and report in November. I know that we just got appropriated the funds, so we're coming up with a list of which corners. And the one where we've had the Path Point presenter come a couple times, that one's included with this project.
Very good.
So
Good, thank
I'll
you.
present on the exact locations at the next meeting.
Thanks, Tom.
Laura, I had a couple of questions. It's regarding sidewalk infill. I know sometime back, you asked a question about a list, and then there was a huge list of having inventory, I think, of sidewalks that needed improvement or reconstruction because of tree roots and things like that. One question is, sometimes I go to a home improvement center and I walk up Laguna from Gutierrez to Haley, and it doesn't seem like there's good sidewalk on either side of the street. Are there any plans for any sidewalk infill in that area around Laguna? It seems like Laguna has more dirt path and lack of sidewalk or inconsistent sidewalks than Garden, or I know Olive has sidewalk on the east side of Olive going down from Haley down to Montecito, but not on the west side, and so on. So what's the status on that?
We currently don't have a project at that location, but with requests, we add a point to that location, which brings up the priority. We do sidewalk infill based on, we rank them and try to complete the ones that are the highest. And so by you requesting it, we can add a point to our system, and that'll raise it up.
So send you I was thinking about just walking around taking notes, which I need to be more vigilant about as far as tree roots sticking up, big humps on sidewalks in the downtown area. I noticed years ago they did all that brickwork along Carrillo Street from I think Santa Barbara over to Chapala, and some of the trees are pushing up those bricks and causing a lot of humps and irregularities. So to me, that's a downtown street, and that's a major thoroughfare for a lot of pedestrians. So to me, that would take a higher priority.
Bob, I have a little experience in talking with Laura about these issues, and I happen to know that there is a huge, tremendously large list of areas like this that have to be prioritized. And I think it might be helpful for our committee to consider looking into where we recommend that priority be placed and start reporting these issues, because if they're not put on Laura's radar, if there isn't community
Input.
input, these things are going to get overlooked. And in my estimation, is I reported an issue in my neighborhood, and based on available funding and priorities and backlog, I estimate it maybe 50 years before my neighborhood gets attention, unless there becomes a resurfacing in my neighborhood.
We will be
Mike,
discussing
you had a
this
comment?
item in November. We have an item, or agendized item for sidewalk safety and improvements.
Good.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Laura? Thank you for that
Thank you
report.
very much.
And we have a public comment from Accessible Santa Barbara on this item.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura, thanks for that incredibly detailed report, and I think Nick, committee member, just covered what I wanted to suggest, but maybe I wanted to try to formalize it a little bit. I heard a very detailed report. I heard an overwhelming number of specific questions about the priorities and how they're set and different items, and initially I was going to suggest a few myself, but you, I think it's, let's just look at the larger picture here. I'm wondering if there is the possibility of you instituting some more formal process of consultation in the planning process, years in advance. It seems like you often are informed of these great projects after they've been completed or and I do think, as Nick said, you could have some really valuable input into the prioritization process. There are a lot of factors. Obviously, the city has to balance in terms of setting the priorities, but I would love to see a process where you have some more formal input far enough in advance to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are charged to do that, so it is a matter of, back to my communication concern, setting up a process where we are proactive in checking these lists.
Good point.
All right.
Okay, we're about 10 minutes early. We have a break scheduled for 10:40, but I suggest we take a break right now and come back and we can finish off the agenda. Does that work with everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, sounds great.
I have 10:30 now. Let's go 10:35. We'll meet back here at 10:35.
10:35. Thanks, Laura.
No problem, thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Thank you, Laura.
I have to go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in session, and the next is a report from our esteemed building official, Andrew Stuffler. The title is 88 Grievances with Local Businesses, but I want to make sure that you're aware that we're really concerned about CBC compliance when there's a permit issued and what happens when they have a permit. We all know that ADA is pretty much lawsuits, individual or to DOJ. So thank you so much. This is the man, by the way, who is in charge of all the building activity and giving the permits and taking all the flack from everybody who wants to do it my way, right?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm Andrew Stuffler. I'm the building official for the city. I think between Mike and I, we probably see 99% of the construction that goes on in the city, 95% of the state and county we don't, but we get to see a lot of the construction. And we're extremely busy. We are at a record high. We've been at a record high construction activity, all-time record since, I think it was May of this year. So it is, as it probably feels, it's hard to drive a block or two without seeing a construction site. It's just very, very busy. So that makes the anxiety level of our permit applicants and our contractors kind of a little higher, right? They want to get their permits before the bubble bursts and get their work done before things come to a slowdown, which they always do in a cycle, right? Either an abrupt or a nice steady slowdown. And with that anxiety comes them looking at prioritizing what are the important parts of their project. And, Accessibility is still a challenge here for some of our contractors and designers and business owners. I think they all have, I like to think they all have good intentions, but many of them don't understand the laws. And I have to admit, I'm not a certified access specialist by the state, and I struggle to understand all the laws between, especially when it comes to housing, multifamily housing, because there's federal HUD standards, there's federal ADA, there's a lot of history of regulations. So, so if you're having questions about enforcement, and to what extent do we enforce, how do we enforce construction that isn't compliant or businesses that are operating contrary to what the current building code requirements are, I'm happy to try to explain it to you as best I can. And if I have questions, if you have questions I can't answer, I'll take them back to our certified access specialist. I realize I talk too fast sometimes, so I'm going to slow down. And then I can return to you with answers from our certified access specialists. So feel free to ask any questions you like.
Where do I start? I've got a long list of questions along these lines. Thank you for coming, by the way. I've seen a number of local businesses who use valet parking, and that valet parking monopolizes their limited ADA parking. And the businesses are often quite obstinate in their belief that because they're on private property, they're immune from ADA laws. And the city police department is understaffed and unable to prioritize enforcing this. And I wonder if there's anything the building department can do to follow up with these businesses who blatantly ignore, I mean, they have to put in this ADA parking to get their building permits. But there's no path to enforcement. And I wonder what your department can do to help us with that.
Well, that's actually a very poignant and current topic that we've been discussing with all the larger scale development that doesn't have parking on site. They're using valet parking. The new California Entrada project is an example of that, Lower State Street. And I divided up into that situation into two pieces. There's a business practice piece. We don't get involved with business practices, so how they operate their valet service, if they provide a valet service, is not in a building and safety, a California building standards or building and safety enforced business practice, but it is subject to Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, right? It's a business practice and they can't discriminate. So that would be one that you might, from a city standpoint, you might want to check with anybody can report the violation to us. There's no wrong door for that. We'll send it to our transportation people in Public Works. We'll have them look at it from a public transportation policy standpoint. Is providing the valet parking something that's even allowed there? And do they have the correct permits for that from Public Works? The business practice part of accommodating individuals who have disabilities relative to the valet parking is not something that they're going to enforce. That's definitely a court of law.
So your position is that this is a civil matter?
Well, that business practice would be a civil matter, right?
Okay.
But if there's, but let me finish, because there is another half to this that is ours, right? So if we'll take just a multifamily building or a hotel, for example, anywhere in town, a new hotel or multifamily building, they have to have accessible parking, right? So we're going to confirm that they have not only accessible parking, but they have a path of travel from that accessible parking to all their entrances and exits and public right-of-way. Any common areas in the facility they have to have access to. Now they set up a valet service after we've issued a certificate of occupancy, and they start using the accessible parking stall for another purpose, parking ambulatory, standard vehicles in that stall. That's enforced by the city through the police department, and like you say, we're reporting that depending on the service calls for service at any given time. It may get responded to quickly, it may not. It may be a lower priority when they have a lot of calls. That can also be subject to ADA for a civil lawsuit. If they restripe their parking lot, if they make a physical change to the property that's contrary to what we approved, then that's our shop. We jump in and say, hey, you know, that was striped that way, that was set up to be van accessible with the larger access aisle. You can't come back and repaint it and make it smaller and try to squeeze another space in or make the access aisle go away. Then we'll respond to that. We'll write them a notice of violation, our standard enforcement process. We'll give them a reasonable amount of time to abate the violation. 30 days is usually a standard that we use. If they don't abate in 30 days and they haven't made any progress at all that's meaningful, we have the option of writing an administrative citation. That violations, administrative citation violations are $100 per day per violation. So for every day they go beyond whatever we gave them in the notice of violation, we can multiply that by 100 and then issue them a citation at any time for that amount. Our citations are usually, our initial citations are usually $3,000. We wait 30 days, right? They've been in violation for 30 days, they didn't abate it, so we multiply that by 100 and we give them a ticket, an administrative citation for $3,000. The next citation we issue, we can issue within 10 days, just as a policy rule we have. And that we issue at $200 a day, so that's a $2,000 citation. And then every citation we issue after that is at $250 a day. We'll usually wait 10 days and write another citation. So there we have a good negative monetary incentive for them to get into compliance if they hadn't. The problem that we find is they usually aren't changing the physical part of the property. They're usually
Changing their use.
changing their business practices, how they use the accessible stall, blocking off a path of travel. Things that don't require a building permit, aren't regulated by us, and are civil issues, but extremely expensive to approach, right? Because you have to either be an attorney or be fluent with how to file a civil case in court, or hire an attorney, and that's pretty expensive business. So that's sort of how we look at it. We look at it from a business practice, civil issue, and the change of private property that, contrary to what the building standards allow, is ours. We take that to enforcement and issue a notice.
Can I ask for clarification here? They come to you for a permit, and part of that is we need to have, let's say, 2 accessible stalls and signage on the wall saying who to call or who's going to tow, right? Then they decide not to enforce that at all. Are you saying that you can't do, as a building department, say you have not followed through, you're not maintaining your permit, you're not maintaining your path of travel? Is that, did I miss something here, or is that really not something you can do?
They have to make a physical change. So if they have signs above their accessible parking, van only, or van accessible, and they come out and repaint the access aisle and take down the van accessible sign, right, to try to buy a foot or 2 of space, then that's a physical change. We'll write them a notice of violation. If they make no physical changes and they just start parking cars that shouldn't belong in there, there's no building standard that says, you know,
The police need to be
we
involved.
are in charge of that. That's where it becomes a violation of the, I think it's motor vehicle code or something, and the police department enforces that. And that's tough because we have a lot of calls for service and a limited amount of police people.
I don't know if the rest of the committee knows, but I recently tried to get the Hotel Indigo to abide by their ADA parking rules and to cease with their misuse via their valet. And I tried to get the Santa Barbara Police Department involved, and the officer who came out threatened to cite me and refused to cite the driver of the vehicle. So that's a tough pill for me to swallow when the city won't get involved on any level, and not only that, but then threatens me for trying to get the city to enforce the law.
Do you mind if I respond to that?
Yeah.
I think when that was elevated, because I spoke with Captain Stoney myself, and there's obviously a number of issues that can go wrong. Some can be training, some can be anything based. So from the top level of PD, he confirmed that parking on private property, they do enforce that, and will enforce it on a call-in basis, or if they happen to be patrolling that lot.
Yeah, you know what's interesting there, though, just a point of fact, I believe it was the last February they reported that there was, 60 citations issued or something to that nature. I experience this on a daily basis. So I see 60 in 2 months myself.
Yeah.
The city has addressed 60 in a year.
Yeah, they do have a long list. I imagine the ratios of people stealing things from Macy that don't get caught go far above as well. I'm sure they have a lot to do. One good piece of takeaway information is that the PD is not able to issue a citation if the ADA parking spot is not properly signed, and that's signage on the ground and above. And so that's kind of a gray area where this would come into. So if they are removing signage, that would be a physical change. And so you could run into a problem where an officer may not write a ticket because that spot is not properly signed. And if that's the case, the way I understand it, it would come back to the building department.
And that was not the case for me.
Yeah.
I pointed to the sign and asked the officer, what does that sign mean if you can't enforce that?
Yeah, no, I get your frustration. That would be frustrating for anybody, but I don't think that was the correct way to handle the problem, and I'd hate for that to carry on as being conveyed as the way these problems are handled.
And that's been my experience. That's the way these problems have been handled in my experience. And that's why I'm looking at any avenue, and it seems to me that the building department could help enforce this should they choose to.
I have a question that's moving away from the parking part, because that's a little bit police department, a little bit you guys. Let's just look at a permit issued for a place that needs to have an elevator lift, or a path of travel, or accessible bathroom, and let's say these things are locked, which happens a lot in town, or they're blocked, the path of travel is blocked, or the lift is not working. My understanding of the code says that the building department is involved in maintaining the path of travel because you gave the permit to do it. If these people are blocking it or locking the door or not repairing the equipment, this is something that, I know you don't have the people to go around and look for problems, the inspectors, but if the public come to you and say, I found a place that has a locked door or a broken lift, is that your purview to do something because they're not maintaining the path of travel?
Yeah, so there's another couple good examples. If there's equipment that was required by the building code for accessibility purposes, or actually for anything, whether it was sanitation or means of egress or fire resistant construction, that has to be maintained, and that's clear in the building code. If it's required by the building code and it's put in, it has to be maintained in accordance with the building code. So whenever you see that, broken equipment, or if it's just tagged as inoperable, you can report that to us, and we'll respond to that. Yeah, report that to our complaint line. We'll create an enforcement case, and we'll send an inspector out.
You have a complaint line.
And I would like to, before we get done, I want to make sure we all understand where to do these reports. I know it could be at your desk, it could be on the phone, or different ways. Before we finish, could you just give a brief overview of how to do that? And like I said, we don't expect you guys to go out there and look for problems. If it's reported to you, please explain that to the group.
Okay, so let's make a note that when I'm done, we'll go to the city website, we'll find the complaint line, because I don't have it memorized.
Sounds good.
But so the first element to that, of businesses that aren't compliant, they've installed equipment that doesn't work, or they're not maintaining equipment, then or they've locked it off, made it inaccessible, you can let us know about that.
Okay.
If they block it, we see a lot of this, people or businesses will put in a lift, and it doesn't get used regularly, so they start storing things.
Right.
So if it's just boxes of stuff, you can send it to us. We're going to go out and we're going to tell them to remove the boxes. But we have no authority, to do anything other than that. So we're just going to tell them to remove the boxes, and they're and 100% of the time they remove the boxes, and we make a record of it, and we walk away. And I would imagine that it isn't very long thereafter, and boxes go back there again, right? So.
What do you mean you have no authority? You can't issue a citation?
Not for the storage of boxes on a lift. I can't. It's too transient. There's no way I can issue a citation for that. There's nothing in the building code, in the installation standards of a lift, that says you can't put a box on a lift. You can. How long? Well, common sense tells you no longer than you have to, and certainly not to a length that it makes the equipment unusable. But we have to, I have to be realistic with my expectations, your expectations. There are so many transient violations, not just in accessibility, but in all of the building code, plumbing code, mechanical code, green building code, energy code. It's impossible for us to deal with the transient, those temporary violations that come and go.
So are you talking about for example, all the moving parts in the internal space of a building? Is that what you're talking about, transient?
I'm referring, transient I'm using as a way to note the temporal aspect of like storing boxes on a chairlift.
It's only temporary.
Right? It may be, someone may do that for 5 minutes while they're moving boxes around. Some people may leave them there for, as a storage closet, right?
Or for example, in the Tupelo restaurant, I remember there's an item mentioned about tables and service items blocking the use of either the bathroom, was it, Nick, or the lift?
It's their lift, which is now out of service and has been for over 6 months.
Right. So that you have not only out-of-service lifts or components used for accessibility, but then you have moving parts like tables and service items blocking that lift, even though it's out of service. So I'm curious what the lines of demarcation are as far as what you can legitimately and realistically enforce from the building department, and maybe what could be enforced under some other jurisdiction, either under the ADA or under, what the city's purview is. I know Mike has told me before, that the city's concerned about city items and not private businesses or private property. And
With respect to projects and
Yeah.
ADA accessibility upgrades.
Yeah. So there's.
So what I'm hearing, Bob, is that with the storage, sorry, the mic's not on. With the storage, there's nothing the city can do. With the lift being out of service, that's something that they can follow up on. Now, are you able to, aside from just notifying them that it needs to be repaired, is there any sort of, do you have any teeth to that law? Can you enforce that in any way? Can you compel them to repair it?
Yes, so the process that I explained earlier with the notice of violation applies to any violation of the building standards. So if and we can go out and we have the authority to go out and look at boxes on a chairlift, right? I want to make sure that I'm clear in sharing with you what our authority is. But I also want to manage the expectation, because we can't even keep up with the permanent fixed building violations. We have over 1,000 of them in play at any one time. And we would need, I have 2.5 inspectors. I would need 25 inspectors to deal with all the violations that come up promptly. To promptly deal with all the violations that come up, and that's not going to happen. So that's just the building related ones. The transient ones, the ones I term as transient, which are more of a business use, right? Someone starts storing boxes on an operable lift. I don't want to give you the expectation that we're going to be able to go out and remedy those. I don't have enough staff to even go look at them, because there's many, like you, I'm aware of this. I go to stores, I go to businesses, I see what they're doing. I could get no rest at all if I wanted to. I could be in perpetual enforcement mode all the time. When I go to dinner, when I go to a hotel, when I go to, use a facility, it's...
Welcome to my life.
Exactly, and this is the frustrating part, right? Because the piece that's missing, and from my perspective, maybe yours, I'm not sure, but it sounds like the piece that's missing is you either go to the local authority, right? Try to get some free support to help you get the right that the rights that are due to you, right? Your civil rights are upheld for access, or you hire an attorney. There's a huge gap in between there. That's $450 an hour and $0. There's nothing in the middle to help. Other than there are associations in the city that you may be able to turn to that are private, that might be able to support you on a particular case-by-case basis. But that's still not a dependable common remedy to use. Like a parking lot, If you're a business and you want your parking lot to be, the parking standards in your parking lot to be upheld, you hire a security company. And they're on site while your parking lot's operational, and they make sure people park correctly, or they have them towed away. It doesn't happen with accessibility.
A question for Mr. Sussman, but also for Mike and Tina. I know we talked about it before, and, you know, peer pressure, you know, a bunch of us going to a restaurant that's violating the ADA code in some way, but is there some, I think we've talked a lot about being more proactive as members of the disability community. What about media sources like Yelp or other social media that can really bring public pressure to bear and saying, look, what you're doing is not okay, and we're going to let people know about it, and maybe that kind of pressure will bring the proper pressure to bear in making something happen, because I know you guys are understaffed.
Yeah.
I
I
know
agree,
you
Bob,
can't
and I
afford-
think that's a useful outlet, but I think it's beyond the scope of this discussion.
I agree, but it could be a good thing to use.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to have that discussion with you as a member of the public outside this committee.
Yeah, Mr. Stuff, I want to clarify on the transit thing. I know we talked about this at, I think, 28 Anna Kappa with the 4-foot path of travel. Your position was if it's a chair in the way, that's nothing that you can do. If it's a permanent thing, then there is a maintenance issue. Is that correct? So the same kind of thing. Can the boxes be moved even though they're there for 2 years in a row? And you're right, as soon as you say move them, they're going to be back tomorrow. At the Tupelo, it's interesting, they actually have a plywood sheet on top of it to hold the silverware and the glasses. So it's not just a box or two, it's like a platform now to hold things. But the broken part is strictly something that you can do, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now, in the middle there is a few places I've seen where they are told to have a accessible door, and yet the door is locked and there is no buzzer. And there seems to be no way to get the people inside to open the door. Do you consider that a violation or a transient? And what is the kind of restriction on locking a door and not having a way to get it inside? It has the big sticker on it, looks great, but it doesn't open. So how does that work out?
So, Mr. Chair, to me, that would be a building code violation. If the building code requires access through an entry door for that facility, and they've locked out, they've physically changed that door so that it cannot function the way we approved it, that's a building code violation. And that is a transient one, because it may be them just locking and unlocking a door, but it's still nonetheless a building code access violation.
Okay. And is the same thing applying for a bathroom door? You can, it's my feeling if it's locked, it's not accessible. Is that how you feel? If you lock a door?
I don't recall any regulations in the building code for that require public restrooms to be unlocked. And in most of our experience, I don't know about yours, my experience, especially heavily traveled public facilities like Starbucks and McDonald's and some of these restaurants and food services that have a lot of people coming to them, they do put codes on their door because they do want to limit the use of the restroom to their patrons and not others. So that type of a security lock where you have to go to the cashier like anybody else and say, what's the code for the restroom, is not, in my view, a violation of any standard. If they lock a door that's specifically meant to provide disabled access to the restroom facilities, and there's no way to get that door open, that is a violation.
Okay, I should have clarified. The doors I'm thinking about are outside. There's no one to talk to. It's not like in McDonald's where the cashier's right there and you just say, what's the code? There's like no one around. And you can't get into the building because that door is not accessible.
So nobody can use those restrooms?
Well, other people can walk through up the stairs and go get the key or the code. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't get to where the people are to get whatever access you need. So, okay, well, that's good to know then.
I've got a related question about aisle widths in stores. I frequently see stores, especially around the holidays, overstocking into the aisles. That's a safety concern to the general public and not just the disabled, but it creates a unique situation for wheelchair users. Is it the fire department's responsibility to enforce that?
It's both of ours, so please report that. That's a very common, especially like you say, during the holiday retail season. It's just packing as much merchandise as we can. They put,
Isn't that also a transient issue?
but it is, but it's a very broad and very serious life safety issue as well. So means of egress from a retail facility is a very high priority for us and a very high life safety liability for the community. And there is no other way to enforce that. So that needs to come to us.
Now, it's my understanding that commercial businesses have an annual fire inspection. Is that true?
We do fire inspections, but I'm not an expert on that. We would have to talk to the fire marshal about what the period is, if it's every 2 years or a year. I'm not.
But so when there's an inspection and there's a violation noted, is it the fire department that enforces that, or you?
The fire department does those inspections, Fire Prevention Bureau, yes.
Okay. Then I wonder, the enforcement cases that we've talked about so far, you say have to come from the public. But it seems to me that the fire department should be reporting some of these issues to you during their inspection.
I can't comment on the scope of the fire department's activities and if it should be broadened, but I do feel fairly confident that the Fire Prevention Bureau, like just about every division in the city, has no one sitting around waiting for more work to be done.
Yeah, but they're already going through these places and taking these notes, and they should be.
It's a tough line. Should they be inspecting plumbing and electrical and all building code issues, and then it becomes a full building code analysis?
I appreciate the efficiency, the comment, the suggestion that there's efficiencies in being there, right, to be able to do it. But there's also expertise that's needed to know that when was that accessible feature put into place, what were the code requirements at that time. I wish it were, gosh, it would be so much easier if the state would just have adopted the Americans with Disabilities Act. That would have been so much easier. But we have a state building standard, we have interpretations of the state building standard. It's not deemed equivalent to the ADA. It's like 99 point some percent equivalent. Some people say it's very frustrating.
Thank you for explaining that, because some of us really don't have that kind of background before coming onto this committee.
Are there other comments and questions for Mr. Stuffler? Ken, I bet you have some. Karen?
No?
As long as we know how to communicate with things, this is, like the Harvey situation is coming on, communication, interpreters right there, so, at least something there's improving, there's slow improvement, I see things in educating people. Plus, what we're dealing with is attitudes. Nick's frustrated, I get frustrated because people just, how to deal with attitudes that are just, either they want to just confront and, or it's like you have to confront people at the airport or something like that. We have to think how to approach it and how to deal with negative attitudes and keep calm and get our community to deal with it. Same as you're talking about your experience, just keep calm, deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question. I don't want to pick on this particular restaurant, but I do go to Tupelo Junction quite a lot. I like their food. And
Where is that?
It's on State Street.
Right
It's on
north of the Granada?
East.
Granada.
On the
Side.
same side?
Okay.
So they put all sorts of, they have the plywood, they got the glasses, the silverware, the tablecloths, and the thing's broken. And every time I ask the waitress, is your wheelchair lift accessible? Well, it's broken right now, and she sometimes they giggle, and I go, I don't think it's very funny. And so, forget all that story. I know it takes a long time for your guys to get over there because you're so busy. What do you suggest to people who go to a place, the best way to go to the owner and go, this needs to be fixed as soon as possible? Pardon?
Besides screening.
Right. And Yelp is a good way to get the attention, but I would just like to be able to tell someone, you know what, I don't want to sue you, I just want you to fix this, okay? Because none of us here are into litigious things. We don't want to be that guy. We want things to be right. And if they get a permit from you saying they must have a lift, then they must have a lift. When our special meeting was here, we had a big rainstorm. Remember that, how bad it was? Nick and I went there. He had to go to the bathroom. He had to cross the street in that huge downpour in his wheelchair because he couldn't get to the indoor bathroom. And they thought it was cute. So anyway, what should the public do when they find
I
something
think
like
it's
that?
clear that there's a process, and he's gonna inform
Yeah.
us on how we need to move forward with those
Well,
complaints.
but that'll take a while, is what I'm saying.
Well, but we're starting.
Right, but I'm saying,
We're
while we're
starting
there,
with-
should we do something? Should we threaten something? Should
Well,
we
you
just?
can always ask to talk to the manager, I mean.
Yeah, I think that's where most of us start, and I think that once you don't get the response you're looking for from the management, there's no sense in wasting your time with that, and
Yeah.
your next option is to bring it to the city as a formal complaint.
Are there any other questions, or should we just get Mr. Stuffer to check the website and let us know exactly what to do? Oh, I have
Are you
a,
going to show
For
us?
the phone
You're
number.
going to show us.
One more suggestion. We've learned to follow through with a complaint, it's not just the restaurant. The restaurant may
Open
be
city
leasing
website.
the building space, so who's the building owner? And we've learned to you have to go up the food chain
Public
sometimes
facing
to
site.
get to the source of the person who can actually respond to and follow through with fixing the complaint.
Yeah, Bob, that's a very important point, and I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, that slipped my mind. When someone's involved, when there's a violation of the building standards, there's a physical change, there's something that was put in and no longer works, hasn't been maintained. Those violations are a strict liability of the property owner, from our perspective.
Yes.
We're gonna issue all of our notices are gonna go to the property owner, they're not gonna go to the tenant. Now, good landlords have good leases, right, and good rental agreements, and they have themselves protected from that, hopefully, in their good, well-written lease. But that doesn't change who we send our notices and administrative citations to. I was in a hearing yesterday on $5,000 of administrative citations with a property owner who was frustrated, right, because he had been talking to his tenant and emailing his tenant and writing his tenant, and his tenant was telling him everything's taken care of, wasn't taken care of. And now he's getting administrative citations. So that is a super important point. When it's a business operation, typically speaking, it's the liability of the business. But when it's a physical change to private property, lack of maintenance of equipment, removal of equipment, that is strict liability of the property owner. I will also say this, and I think we all know this. Words come and go, but you put something in writing and you mail it to someone, or hand deliver it to someone and have them sign for it,
Make a copy.
it has a different feel and people take it differently, right? So that's one of the reasons why we write administrative citation warning letters. We don't call people and say, we might give you a citation in the next 10 days if you don't get on your horse and start riding. We send them a letter, and it's very effective because we tell them how much the citation's going to be.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like a fix-it ticket mindset rather than a, whoa, there's my citation. I never even really had a chance to do anything.
Tomorrow.
Right.
thanks for that.
Thank
That brings up a question for me. As an example, at Tupelo Junction, you're saying that the wheelchair lift is the responsibility of the owner of the building and not at all the business who put the crud there and doesn't call the repairman, is that right?
The function of it, the maintenance of it, its operation, its ability to operate and function is the liability of the owner of the property. That is a
Okay.
physical part of the building, just like a ramp would be, right? Or an elevator.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, so that people aren't angry at the waitress for something they
Right.
can't do anything about.
But even talking to the manager then is not the right person, right? You should say,
Well,
who owns this building?
It depends what the violation is, right? So if it's not operable, clearly doesn't work, or someone's telling you it doesn't work, then the owner is the person you need to go
Okay.
to, because it doesn't work, or someone's told you that. If they're telling you it doesn't work, it actually works, and they just want to use it for storage,
Right,
that's
gotcha, okay.
a business operation. So, but nonetheless, you go to the property owner and say, hey, we had a need to use the accessible lift that's required by state and federal law,
Okay.
and it was not accessible to us. And your very nice waitress explained that it was inoperable. Please let us know, within the next 30 days when it's operable, so that we can come and enjoy your facility and have the access that's entitled to us.
And just to show my ignorance, but besides looking up through all sorts of records in the city, is a tenant required to let me know who the owner is and give me a contact info? How did I find out who owns a building easily without?
Go to the county assessor recorder's office. Those records are all
Yes,
labeled.
that's what I've found. And also, sometimes property owners are very slippery. They hide behind a corporation or they're out of town. And so they try to make themselves hard to get, hard to find. And so, but like you said, the county assessor's office is a good resource. Find out who owns a property and what the exact footage is and all that pertinent information.
Seems to me that wouldn't be a problem for your department to figure out who to contact.
It's not a problem, but it's illegal for us to give out property owner information on code enforcement.
Correct, but if we
cases, so.
report a violation to you, you're not going to have any trouble finding the appropriate person.
Correct.
to
Right,
notify.
but we can't tell anybody else.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of a weird thing, but.
Yep, no, I get it.
Understood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, I have a public comment
Should we-
here, but you
you
were
wanna
also
do
going
the
to tell
website real quick?
Tell us the website.
Yeah,
so.
it's right there.
So it is right here. I'll back out how we got here. So if we Google City of Santa Barbara website or anything such as that, usually the first link that comes up is the open-facing city website, santabarbaraca.gov. Go in there and it brings you to the home page. The most useful tab for somebody looking for something to be done is this How Do I tab. So how do I report all this sort of stuff? Animal control. The second one is building and zoning code violations. So you can click on there and it'll give you a list of common building code violations, land use and sign ordinance violations, and then right down here, the request for investigation hotline,
Ah,
or email contact, or obviously mail, and the front desk here is available as well if you're in person.
thank you.
And for the inside scoop, which one is the best? I've tried them all, and I don't know which one actually gets the most attention. So can you give us the inside scoop?
The phone number, how do I say this without incriminating ourselves?
Yes.
So we had a period where we have a Spanish line and an English line, and we were checking the English line, and the person who was checking the Spanish line retired and forgot. And we had a period, it was a while ago, but it was a little embarrassing, where we had gone a number of weeks,
Okay.
very large number of weeks, where we hadn't checked it. So nothing beats coming in with just a simple handwritten or typed up complaint to the counter. You give that to somebody, that's going to get put in the system probably as soon as it comes in.
Okay.
Or sit on their desk. We do pretty good with our email, so if you want to use the request for investigation email, that I think might take a day or two, but at least every day that goes to people's desks, so, and more than one.
And you do not respond to the complainter about anything. You just, there's no extra input.
I know, yeah, that's
right.
true.
We'll look into it.
It's in the black box and we trust
We'll
you
look
to do
into it.
something, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, you can come, just so you know, you don't even have to come in anymore because we've updated our records management system online. You can also go online and you could go to a street file and you could look and see if a notice of violation has been issued, because we'll send those to the street file. Or when a case is closed, all the pertinent records that we administer go to a street file.
In a perfect world, how long might it take? But I complain on something, how long roughly when I take it a perfect, no problem,
When you're not.
before the violation is actually in the street
file.
file?
So we have goals, and they're tiered. So if it's an immediate priority, something like if the building is falling down or someone is going to, if the kid's going to get killed when he touches it, that's at the same day. Not even one day. When we get those, we send somebody out, because that's pretty rare. But when it does happen, raw sewage is probably one of those examples.
Sure.
So someone will have an apartment building, it backs up, they take the clean off out. the yard's full of sewage, so we get out immediately. 'Cause that's
And the violation will be filed right away too, right? Not just.
Yeah, we create the case.
Okay.
Actually, we abate the violation, we order abatement and see the abatement done, that it's cleaned up, and then we come back and do the enforcement case, because that stuff's super serious. Then we have potentially hazardous, that would be like the sales gondolas in the aisles during the holidays, or somebody's blocking a means of egress. Those we try to get to in less than, I can't remember if it was a week or 10 days. And then the low priority, which would be anything that is not a means of egress, a life safety, someone could get hurt this week on it. Unfortunately,
The kinds of things we'd be reporting.
unfortunately, much of it would be the access compliance, right? Unless that's part of a means of egress, so there's a caveat there. Then those we try to respond to within 30 days.
That's important to mention when we file a report, if it's impeding access and egress, or
Yes.
specifically emergency egress, then that would get a higher priority.
Yeah. And sanitation does also. Right?
So,
Access to a bathroom could be a sanitation issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
and certainly safety.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Thanks
Any
for
other
having me.
questions for Mr. Stuffler?
One other thing to note that might be of interest to the group is at the bottom of this website with all of the information is a nice little link to convenient city hotline numbers. And this has things, I know I'd recently provided you guys with the police department 24-hour non-emergency number. And so there's a range of other numbers out here that.
You mentioned that a postal notice would be more efficient than an email notice. I guess I had assumed that there would be some sort of integration between the email and your official records, but no, someone has to manually key in an email notification into your database if you're notified via email.
No, I think that might have been a misunderstanding. If I said that, I apologize. It's the voicemails. The voicemail box sometimes doesn't get checked for a day or two.
Okay.
But when someone hand delivers us something at our counter, it's processed that day.
Right, but what about email?
And the email we do pretty good on. That may take a day or two, like the voicemail, if someone's away or the counter's very, very busy.
Okay.
But we do clear the email box.
Has there ever been any discussion about a web-based form that would go directly into your database so that there's
Yes.
no manual keying of that information?
And that's coming. So
It is coming.
we're changing out our entire land development permitting and plan check system. And we're like halfway in the middle of it. It's about a 16-month, 18-month endeavor. So we should be done by February or March of next year. And one of the elements that will be included is a citizen access portal, they call it. And you can enter information in there, and then it's screened by staff who can accept it, and it'll go into the database.
Great, that seems like that would really help with efficiency.
Yeah, we're hoping it will, yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
We have one public comment from Cheslow Santa Barbara, and then please make it as brief as you can because we're running a little bit late here.
Hi again, Will Railing. Thank you, Mr. Stuffler, for that. As you know, I've said many times before, we think the building department does a pretty darn good job on accessibility here, but there's room at the margins for advocacy. Mr. Stuffler mentioned a little bit of a gap, and that's what we try to address. And we try to assist and facilitate this complaint process. So I think you all are more clear now that the federal ADA is actually a civil rights statute that the city does not enforce. So they're not going to address a service animal denial, that sort of thing. But the California Building Code is an area that the city does enforce, and it must enforce. There are some legal restrictions on the city I'll get into briefly. When there has been a building plan approved, of course, if your barrier that you encounter was not shown on those plans, that is something the city will always come out and fix. Furthermore, recently discovered at a county meeting where the plan checker had actually missed an accessible requirement, and so the plans were approved with a mistake in them. And in a subsequent hearing, the county was very frank that the property owner has still got to fix that. If the city misses an access code requirement in approving a plan and later finds out about it, they will still enforce that. So it's still on the property owner to fix that. Thirdly, property owners do have to comply with both the federal ADA and the California Building Code. There are areas where the federal ADA is stricter. There are areas where the California Building Code is actually stricter. And I'm just going to finally focus on one piece of code, which is very significant, and I'm going to try to initiate a dialogue with Mr. Stuffler over this. Chapter 11B of the Building Code is the section that governs accessibility of public accommodations. There is a section 108 that specifically requires that accessible features be maintained. So that is a duty of the building department to enforce. So a lot of these examples that you're given would actually come under that. A lift that's broken, a door that's locked, a wine barrel that's narrowing a path of travel, that sort of thing. Many of you are familiar with this 129 East Santa Puma restaurant, where the city has done a good job after initially missing something and requiring them to put in a lift for access to the restaurant, which was built completely inaccessible. Now that lift has a required 5-foot by 5-foot clear path, or clear landing at the top of it. When they reopen this restaurant, it will be an immediate violation if and when they put tables and chairs in that area. So that is where Chapter 11B, Section 108 will kick in, and the city will have a responsibility and a duty to come out and tell them to remove those tables and chairs from the required 5-foot by 5-foot path that's on their plan. And lastly, the government code does have some restrictions on the city that require a priority for accessibility complaints. I realize Mr. Stuffler is doing everything he can with what he's got in terms of resources. The California Attorney General has in the past issued opinions that a particular government section requires an accessibility complaint to be addressed by a city within 90 days. They have a hammer of the authority to sue a city for an injunction to enforce that. It's rarely been used. It was used against Mill Valley. It was used against the city of Del Mar. But and again, I'm highly confident that Mr. Stuffler will continue to prioritize accessibility complaints. So please feel free to refer any barriers you encounter to us if you want some help getting a complaint in. Some of our members, basically it keeps the complainant anonymous because we put in the complaint and no one knows that it's, you who want to continue to go to this restaurant without being, harassed.
Poisoned.
Yes.
Or somebody spitting in your food.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Andrew, can you comment on the difference in the status of the transient status of a table versus boxes?
Well, it's not a matter of the violation. The violation's the same, right? Whether they put a table in a path of travel or whether they put boxes on a lift, which is part of the path of travel. It's the same type of violation. The problem is I need to manage expectations, and if I tell you I'm going to go up, we have enough staff to go out and investigate every blocked path of travel. I'm setting an expectation, even though the state law says that we're supposed to do it. I'm very comfortable sitting in a court of law with the Attorney General, for that matter, and sharing with them, this is the staff that I have. These are the number of violations that I have. This is how we prioritize. Every year, they ask me what staffing I need. Every year, I tell them, this is what I get. If you think I'm personally at fault because I'm not doing my best to try to get the resources necessary to comply with the law, then that's the way you should find the case. The reality is cities only have so much funds, and the state is very good at publishing policy directives, regulations. They don't have to pay to enforce them. The state doesn't have to hire 25 inspectors to go out to all the facilities so they can respond to every ADA violation in 90 days or less. They don't. So they know when they publish it that it's not achievable. They know when they publish the motor vehicle code that says that we're supposed to drive in accordance with the speed limit that 80% of the people won't. and they know they won't write a ticket to every single one who violates the speed limit. So, but policy-wise, they want to make the public to understand this is serious, right? So that's the dilemma. Is the state promulgates regulations that try to set the tone for the policy in the state on accessibility or speed of vehicles, but it's up to us as individuals to embrace it. Largely, because police departments and building departments, there aren't enough of us to enforce every single law and every single lawbreaker. That's where the advocacy and the outreach that you can do in a positive way, in writing letters to restaurants that aren't providing accessibility, can spawn a better awareness, a more serious response is necessary, because I'm putting it in writing. I'm not just talking to you about it with your waitress, but I've made a record of it. Maybe I asked somebody to sign for it. Maybe I sent it by certified mail. So there are ways that you can help the community understand and put more weight on their responsibility.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks again. All right. Our last item on the agenda, I think we're going to hear from Mr. Mike. Overview of the public building ADA transition plan.
Yeah, sorry you have to listen to me speak. I'll make it quickly. This is one that's been we've discussed in the past, and there was some curiosity about what the city does as far as meeting the giant backlog of ADA deficiencies we have within city buildings, which I see as a pretty core area that this group can add some input and actually make something happen. So I kind of want to just go over what we do as a city and where the money comes from, how much money we have each year, and then kind of go over some past and current projects for ADA upgrades within city facilities. Let's see what we got here. So I'll cover kind of funding. We'll go over the Gilda Puentes transition plan, which the city leans on pretty heavily as our guide for accessibility upgrades, how we prioritize projects, and some examples of future and past projects. Funding is not an overly optimistic slide. In general, we receive from the general fund roughly $100,000 for ADA upgrades in city facilities and $100,000 for what can be considered walkways and building pathways each year. And so that would be exterior access to a building or to a park or within a park. Historically, so in addition to this, this is specifically for ADA upgrades, standalone ADA upgrades. I do want to remind you that any permitted project within the city, any permitted project in a city building has an ADA element. It by definition has to meet ADA code. 20% of that project budget needs to go into ADA upgrades. So this in no means is the only money that's going towards ADA upgrades. This is kind of a standalone pot of money that is directed towards solely ADA upgrades. So a good example of this would be the Children's Library project or the Central Library project, where $2 million was spent to renovate the Children's Library space, and that just by the act of applying for a building permit was required to handle a huge amount of the backlog of ADA deficiencies within the library, and most definitely on the Children's Library level. So that's the money part. The 2007 Gilda Puentes ADA Transition Plan. It's an enormous and extensive report, and it includes the bulk of the city facilities. Gilda Puentes went through the city facilities in 2007 and did an admittedly extremely thorough job of documenting, taking photographs, all the ADA deficiencies for the ADA code at that point in time. We have that. I have one excerpt of 20 binders worth of material on this. And so we use this with every capital project that we do in a facility. We lean on this report to identify what accessibility upgrades we need to do when that project is put in place. Additionally, with this $100,000 a year that we spend on ADA accessibility upgrades, we use this Gilda Puentes survey to prioritize those projects and chip away at the backlog. And as you can imagine, things range from a $5 repair to a multi-million-dollar elevator replacement. So the scope of this survey is absolutely complete. And we kind of use it as our roadmap for getting to ADA compliance and starting to remove this backlog of deficiencies.
Where is it? Can anybody else look at it?
Physically, it's available. It's just such a giant document that it's unwieldy to make it
Yeah, well,
accessible. I have a hard copy in my office. You're more than welcome to bring a
okay.
flatbed truck over and take it away anytime you like.
It's what, 7 feet or so wide?
It's giant.
There's
So
not an electronic document?
there is an electronic document, and it was my goal this year to make that more available. We actually just recently paid Gilda Puentes to refine her electronic document, so it would be an Excel format. Because we're going through a lot of this now, and we have a city staff member who's going through a lot of this now and kind of sanity checking and figuring out what has and hasn't been done. Because 2007 was 10 years ago, and so we're trying to prioritize where we're going to spend that money in the coming years. And so we want to know what's been done, and we kind of look towards higher visible and higher used buildings like the library and like City Hall, and so this is kind of where our prioritization rationality lies. But in short, there is an electronic copy, and it's on my list to make it more available to this committee and anybody who wants to see it.
well, that was one of my little hobbies, to try and find where were in the documents that were supporting this committee.
Yeah, I think just nobody had the willpower and the time to try and upload a document of this size, so it never really landed somewhere convenient, but I'm going to try and take care of that.
You were standing still when you...
I didn't want to interrupt. But I thought that it was something you said I think was very important. It's been my feeling that the yearly schedule and stuff hadn't been done too much, and now you said now there's someone who's actually in charge of this, looking at everything and trying to prioritize. Is that right? We're kind of moving ahead?
Yeah, you're looking at him.
Okay. Good.
Take
All
a
right.
better look.
Yeah, no, I have
So
I have a regular project meeting with our project engineers who kind of manage a number of facility projects. A lot of them don't necessarily touch ADA, but they have a giant list of projects, and this comes up bi-weekly, figuring out where they're at with this and what we're going to prioritize in the coming years.
And I should ask later, but of course the codes have changed and the laws have changed. Gilda, of course, is not updating this, so when you're looking at a 10-year-old plan, do you then always say, but now we have new requirements, or?
Yeah, we use this to draw attention to where the deficiencies are, and when we correct those deficiencies, we correct them to the current code level. Yeah, as far as prioritization goes, we're always looking for the kind of the best bang for the buck. Sure. Whoever can, the smallest amount of money that will give people the most usability and increase accessibility the most. I know that can be subjective, but I think this is a really good area where this committee could help with that, because we have a small amount of money and a lot to do with it, and so that kind of creates this prioritization where it would be great to get feedback on.
I think that's a good use of this committee and be in our charge.
It's a fantastic use of this committee, yeah, even if starting at a big picture level of which city buildings does this committee feel are
most lacking.
Yeah, most lacking.
Good point, because as you know, the transition plan rules say you should get input, and we have not been really asked for input. So I think, speaking for the committee, I think we'd all would like to be able to give you more input on a yearly or quarterly basis on just what we think is important.
Yeah, I'd be happy agendizing this item even once a year to touch base, because that's that's about as frequent of a cycle as we would need it. We could set kind of go over our project list for the coming year, and those projects would get taken care of that year, and there wouldn't necessarily be a reason to visit on it more frequently than that. A look at some past and future ADA projects. So that's, there's a photo on the screen right now of what's going on at the south entrance of the Central Library. And it's kind of a photo of some, that whole entrance tore up and a masonry wall. And so they're underway right now building an accessible ramp that will serve the parking lot 7 or the parking lot right across from the library. So that whole area and accessing the library from that side will become much easier. This is an example of, this is more than a $100,000 project.
Sure.
So this project, we used a couple years worth of this ADA funding to make sure that this project would happen. We used the kind of the 2016 and 2017 funding, compiled all that funding to make a larger project like this happen. In the coming year, this year, 2018, so today and forward, we don't have anything set in stone, but we're beginning planning discussions of where we want to spend this money. And we're leaning towards City Hall, towards using the Gilda Puente study and determining what the most useful way to spend that money is in City Hall. Because, to be blatantly honest, that's where we receive the most public complaints.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's because the building is used more, but we definitely receive the most accessibility complaints regarding City Hall.
And is that the entrance on the west side, the elevator, or the bathrooms, or all three?
A number of things, the doorways.
I see it says building-wide upgrades. I take that to mean that there's a lot of issues.
This binder is
Yeah, look
solely
at
City Hall.
2000.
Gilda Puente's a study on City
Tear
Hall.
it down and build it again.
I think they'd like to. I think I saw something
Ken,
about
do you have the money for that?
I think I saw an article recently that the city is looking at relocating the city hall if it is possible. Is that true?
Not that I know of. No, I can
I've never
Maybe
heard
I
of
can
speculation.
I can comfortably say that that's not going to happen anytime soon. The building itself is
Maybe take over Santa Barbara News Press. Put it there.
maybe for the police department.
Yeah. Oh, that's what it was the police department then.
Quick question, how come that entrance was not included with the children's library renovation as part of a path of travel? Is there a reason that it somehow didn't get in there?
It was a timing issue. So this south entrance was a mandatory requirement of the permit that was pulled for the children's library.
Okay.
And it had to be done within a set time frame. So this,
And whose rule was that it had to be done?
it had to be done with the project,
Okay,
building and safety. So Andrew
Okay.
Stuffler signed off that this south entrance needed to be completed as a caveat of the building permit for the children's library.
and then they couldn't do it.
Because of timing, we didn't want the whole library shut down, so they
Okay.
waited until that portion was
Okay.
complete so that they could then do this portion.
Maybe I said it wrong. So this was being paid from the general funds, 100 grand a year.
Mhm.
Why wasn't it part of the permit for the?
Oh, the funding
Yeah,
portion.
the funding portion, yeah.
That was just an internal decision. A big bulk of the children's library was paid through grant funds, donor funds.
Right.
And people who were donating money were less interested in earmarking their money for an entrance. Everybody
Yeah.
wanted the shiny stuff. They
Right.
wanted to
Children's.
build nice children's
Because
library
I knew
stuff.
they didn't want to pay for the elevator,
Mhm.
but that was a lot more than this. But it just seemed to me that should have been part of the renovation. But I won't.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was on us as the city to come up with the money for this.
Okay.
The donors weren't willing to pay for a south
Okay.
entrance, and so that's why we used
Kudos
this
to the
source
city
of
for
funding.
figuring out how to make it happen in a reasonable time frame.
Thank you, yeah. So, yeah, this will be done at the end of, or mid to end of October of this year.
That's coming up.
Yeah. That's kind of all I had on this topic. Feel free to ask any questions. I am interested in, at least on a kind of a macro scale right now, seeing if you guys agree that City Hall is a reasonable place to direct some of this funding, albeit it's not a huge amount of funding, but a way that's efficient for us to do these projects is kind of pick a building, work away at it for a year, and then move forth.
From my perspective, City Hall is probably should be the top priority. And I don't know about all the specific issues there. but if you can't access the city to engage the city in other discussions, then you have nowhere to start. So I think it makes a lot of sense to start with City Hall.
That's all I had on this.
Mike, you mentioned, I guess what I'm asking is what's the most efficient way for this committee to be engaged in communicating with you the priorities of which city facilities need the most immediate attention, and you know, how we get that information to you. I know you mentioned discussing this once a year, maybe twice a year, but in committee. But in terms of prioritizing a list of what we would like to see and what the city can practically, in a practical matter, do in terms of prioritizing which facilities to address first.
I think right here, right now, I just posed that question.
So,
If you have a facility that you think is more in need than City Hall, I would love to hear it.
I guess I need to consult the big list in the report.
yeah,
in
I
terms
think
of
that's a good point. Mike has suggested that we agendize this annually. I agree that that would be helpful. I think we as a committee need to get more informed on the background issues,
Yeah.
so that we're prepared to address them when the agenda comes up. And to the extent that staff can help us to understand those issues that staff needs help with, I think it'd be hugely helpful to everyone involved. And on a related subject, as a new member of this committee, I have a sense that there's a somewhat adversarial relationship between the committee and the staff on both sides, and my sense is that that's kind of an old situation, and it's mainly based on staff that's no longer involved, and maybe some of the committee members who have been around and remember that, are still struggling with that. And I think that we all have a lot of common goals, but we also may have some competing agendas or responsibilities. And I'd just like to try and clear the air and at least for me, I want to make sure that when I am passionate about my agenda and it conflicts with staff's priorities or authority, I don't want anyone to take that personally, and I want us to have as good a working relationship as possible, because I think it suits all involved. And so I'm looking forward to more positive interaction, and I hope that the era of this adversarial relationship that I sense can be put behind us.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. I'm a very forward-thinking person myself.
So thinking forward, I have a question. That high-pressure gas line that was one of the limitations, site limitations for the Cabrillo Arts Building.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that that's came down.
It hasn't started yet, but Southern California Gas is paying to put a fairly large portion of that to the center of the road, which is historically where a gas line should be. And so they are going to be relocating a large portion of that gas line.
Because that was one of the limitations for the ramp on the east side of the building.
That was one of the many limitations.
One
yeah.
of them,
Mm-hmm.
and they said that they wouldn't know if and when that was coming out, and our support was, well, conditional on what you've got to work with now, but what they've got to work with now seems to be changing. So will that east ramp get revisited? Can we revisit it?
No. It's already in permit, and the project is going out to bid with the plans as provided. And yeah, this one's a little tough for me, and I'm taking away from this when the meeting minutes weren't approved, and maybe I was overly optimistic. After we first met on this at our special meeting, my takeaway was that it was a positive meeting forward, that everybody was appreciative of the effort that went into ensuring that the ADA community was thought about during this project.
Since
But
I wasn't there, I listened to the audio file several times, and it was clear that Nick was saying, at this point, and that Justin was saying, well, conditional on this. We've done the best
Yep.
we can with the current limitations, but the limitations
Yeah.
haven't changed. so-
At that point was the point when those plans were being submitted, so that was the point of the project.
So when
I didn't get the sense that the project was contingent on the gas line from an accessibility point of view. It seemed that people were more aware of how large and obtrusive a ramp on that side would be architecturally, and meeting the extreme elevation grades that don't exist on the west
Because
side.
on-
Like those were
on
the kind of the
audio
key
tape,
points.
Nick says, well, he has other ideas for how they could accommodate the other three competing goals, one of which was the trash, access to the trash, which is the thing
Mhm.
that was bothering Jim the most. So it seems like, this building hasn't been built yet, what else can we do now that a really major limitation is being removed? It seems too bad to say, oh, well, those plans were approved, because that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I really don't see it as the city saying, "Oh well, we put." You guys were meeting on that project prior to me even being involved.
Well,
you
actually,
had been
we
involved for
were and
years.
We weren't. We were and we weren't. Just like the plans were brought to us and laid on the table, and they said, this is a very big project and these are very big plans. Look at them now, folks, and write us a letter. So that was very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And we could say many good things are happening, but we have not really reviewed this. We haven't signed on to any letter to anybody.
I'd like to remind that this committee shouldn't really be signing or approving anything like this.
No.
We don't have that authority.
What was it he was asking us for then?
And there was a bit of confusion with that, because there was a
Yeah.
letter that indicated that the committee approved, or I can't remember what the hot word
Right, my
was,
motion
but
was basically out of order in terms of that kind of motion even being made.
like this decision is ultimately up to the building and safety department to enforce ADA code.
What was it Justin wanted from us then exactly?
He wanted to be
Informed.
neighborly and informative and garner your support on how signage should look, and some gives and takes on how this project should go. So he was kind of looking to just be helpful and use this resource for ways to spend money that was helpful, and kind of bounce things off of the group,
Okay, because
which is kind of a perfect use of the
He
group.
said he needed documentation of our support, and unfortunately it wasn't there in our minutes. And that was,
Well, it's not ours to give.
but the documentation that he said he needed, maybe that's why we were confused. Because he didn't really need documentation from
No,
us.
we
that
don't
these
have it.
things happened.
I wasn't particularly confused with the outcome of that. I thought, I actually looked to it as kind of a good example. I thought the
Yeah, I-
group did a great job of going back and forth, and of course, both sides can't necessarily have everything, but that's the way that the world works. And so if you meet and come to common ground, I look at that like a win. And that the group kind of played its role in a good way. And still, I kind of model it going forward with projects.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
The key things that I hear
now,
is
Is there no way to?
get the
to
group the
remove-
plans early. You got more time to review, and hear your responses. And I think that's
Excuse me, I have a 12 o'clock appointment.
Oh.
I'm past the 2 hours, so
yeah.
I need to leave. I
We're-
really hate
no,
to do this, but.
We're overtime. We're
She's
overtime.
cutting you off, just saying.
When's the
we're
date
overtime
for the next
anyway.
meeting?
Okay.
Can I ask you a few
Thank you,
questions on the
Mike.
ADA plan?
November, I don't have the exact date,
It's-
but whatever Friday in November.
November 10th.
November
November
10th.
10th. Thank you.
I had a few questions on this one. The rules talk about a projected schedule for burial removal. Now, we don't really have a dated schedule yet for these huge number of things, right?
No.
Okay. And I want to tell the group, there is Gilda picked 10 building that she thought were super important and did a much more in-depth study of those, right?
Yes.
And one of those is the police building.
Yes.
Which I think we've just kind of
Poor-
put on
poor
hold
thing.
because it's not gonna be done, right? So we're down to 9, and now the library is kind of almost taken care of. So what you're looking at now with this 100 grand a year is just those 10, correct? We're not even looking at the other little things, is that right?
Not necessarily, because I feel that we have spent a lot of money in the library and it's getting close, and so it's kind of diminishing returns. We're spending a lot of money
Gotcha.
getting the little stuff done in the library.
And
Looking
then
for big bang for our buck.
The rules talk about a designated responsible person to oversee the plan. That is you these days now, right?
That is
You are
me.
the overseer.
I am that's me.
Okay. And do we have a method to update your plans, and do we have a method to document corrections when they are made? Do we have any kind of paperwork trail on?
That is this
That's
Excel
you.
sheet that I referenced to.
Okay.
And so we just paid Gilda Puente's money, because I feel the best way to track this is through an Excel database. And
Yes.
so we paid her to
Sounds
provide
like-
us
yeah,
with
We
that.
did that UCSB, we had a database we'd check off when things were done, yeah. And the last question has to do with, I saw something on the website that said there was a Access Advisory Committee to staff that met monthly.
Yeah, you've brought this up a few
But-
times, and I've given you the same answer each
Yeah.
time. I'm unaware of that. This
Yeah.
is the Access Advisory Committee,
Okay.
so I'm
Yeah,
sorry
there's
about that
nothing else on
website
there.
error.
Okay.
I don't think we need to necessarily reference it, or I don't know what it is.
I'm curious what it was. It listed you and Andrew and all these people on it with every month, but I don't know what it is, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't lose sleep over that.
All right, I won't.
It doesn't exist.
All right. Is there any other questions or comments then? I think we're all, Kenny had to leave too, okay. All right, well, I'll just call for an adjournment,
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
and we're adjourned.
Right.
Thank you so much for
No worries.
everything.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
See you in
And I have
November.
this information on the meeting with the voting machines, if anyone's interested.
We were ahead of schedule.